Meanwhile, folks in Washington, congressional Republicans are saying that they're open to legislation on improving police practices in major cities, particularly in black communities. So is a change imminent? For that, I'd like to bring in Republican Congressman, House Oversight Committee member Thomas Massie. Congressman Massie, just your thoughts overall before we get to the minutia of a potential vote or bill. You know, defunding police, these kind of things are just not only asinine, but I think they add fuel to the fire.
Yeah, defunding the police is the absolute wrong thing to do. Listen, we have a healthy history in this country of separating our civilian police mission from our military mission. The military does one thing well, and that is to bring overwhelming deadly force to the enemy using tactics and weapons that are different than the police force. So I think as long as we maintain that separation, that healthy separation, we need to fully fund our civilian police force, but we don't need to turn them into the next army.
So would you give them so-called militarized weapons? Where do you stand on that?
You know, the program that takes military equipment and gives it to civilian police force, that's fine if it's body armor or 9mm weapons, but when you start transferring tanks and things and military drones, I think you've gone overboard. So I've got a history of voting to curtail that program, to limit it to only the weapons that are appropriate for civilian police force. We don't need to send them tanks and armored personnel vehicles.
There were a few times in the last week it felt like some cities might have needed that, but you're saying no, that's overboard.
I think it's overboard. But the problem is, I think the rules of engagement maybe that the mayors have imposed, or maybe they've actually downsized their police forces and aren't equipped, to deal with the civilian population. But, ultimately, Charles, the responsibility is not at the federal government. It is at the mayors, who most of the police chiefs work for the mayors. And if you don't like what's going on in your city with the police force, fire your mayor at your next election.
Where do you stand with respect to the federal government, Congress, getting involved on trying to legislate police policies, police tactics, things like chokeholds and things like that are coming up, are now becoming more controversial?
I think that should be left up to the states to legislate and to the city mayors to have policies. I think a one-size-fits-all, top-down solution from the federal government is bound to fail. It will inevitably tie the police's hands in certain situations, and while still authorizing unnecessary force in other situations. So the federal government, our founders never intended for us to be the police force.
Let me ask you about this vote, the Hong Kong vote for the Uyghurs. It voted 413 to 1. So when I saw who the one was, I couldn't wait to get you on the show. What's going on there? Do you feel sympathy for the Uyghurs, or what happened there?
Look, I have no support for the Chinese Communist government, but I believe when you go in and try to legislate for other governments, you invite them to come into your country and try to tell you what to do. Also, the sanctions that you impose on these oppressive regimes, it actually doesn't hurt the dictators, it hurts the people that you're trying to protect. So I think a lot of times sanctions are counterproductive, and I typically don't vote for them. So if you see one on a sanctioned vote, Charles, it's probably a good guess that that was me voting against those sanctions.
All right. I saw where you tweeted out that someone called you the most hated man in Congress. You might not dislike that moniker, huh?
Well, listen, that was the only time CNN got a headline correct, when they called me the most hated man in Washington, D.C. But I've been picking up co-sponsors for my bills, and now all the Republicans are using my talking points and saying we need to show up for work now.
Well, the bottom line is that you do vote your conscience, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Congressman Massie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Charles.